In today's episode, essays from Audre Lorde, a poem from Nikki Giovani, one of the real leaders and voices of the Black Power movement, a novel by Percival Everett, an incredible work of history by Ammonique Perry, some BookTube Prize reading updates, and some updates on what else I want to read for Black History Month. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to just kind of real quick reading update. I don't think I've done one of these for a while and it feels kind of out of place, so I thought I would do this now and talk about what I've been reading with a focus on my reading for Black History Month. As I mentioned in the intro there, I am reading Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. This is an essay collection I started before, and as is oftentimes true with me in essay collections, I have a hard time reading them front to back, unless I'm involved in some kind of a read-along like I was with the essays of James Baldwin. I have a tendency to want to stop and think and reflect on each essay as I go, and that means it takes time. I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish it this time around, but the essays so far, or what's in the book so far, have been pretty good. Some things like her writing about a trip somewhere to a conference or a response to a person who I don't know in letter form that's included in the essays are not as good, don't necessarily resonate with me as much. But some like Sexism, American Disease, and Blackface, an essay she wrote about her son and being a Black young man being raised by lesbians, the essays in which she talks about intersectionalism of her being a Black lesbian woman, and the impact that has have been really, really good. So I am planning on finishing that this month, but that's kind of an ongoing project for me, as is the reading of the collected poetry of Nikki Giovani, a book I acquired I think a couple of years ago, and I started reading, but I started over again this year, and I'm almost through the second in the collections in the collected poetry. Essentially what they've done is they've taken her poetry collections chronologically, I believe, as far as I can tell, from 1968 till 1998, and including this book, and so I'm reading through them. And I'm right now, the poetry collections I'm reading by her are those in the late 60s, in which she is really talking about the Black Power movement, about racism, discrimination, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and kind of politics plays a really big role. I really like the poetry of Nikki Giovani. As is true with essays and with other books of poems I've read, not all the poems necessarily speak to me. I wonder if this is true this has to be true for almost everybody in terms of reading poetry, that not every poem works for you, but the ones that do really, really work. And so I'm going to attempt to read a poem, one of Nikki Giovani's more famous poems, I think, which you can probably find on the poetry.org website. My poetry readings don't always go so well, so fingers crossed here. This one's called Nikki Rosa. Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're Black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilet. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself and how good the water felt when you got your bath from one of those big tubs that folks in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings, as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. And even though you remember, your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together and you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand. Black love is Black wealth. And they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. I think that is a remarkably beautiful poem, so I wanted to share that with you. Hopefully I'll get a long way through Nikki Giovani's collected poems this year. I hope to. I'm not sure I'll finish them this year, because as with essays, I usually want to stop and reflect on a poem for a little while after I read it. And I find if I read too many in a row, they all just kind of blend together and I don't remember them very well. I have finished reading one book for Black History Month, and that was South to America. Let me read the whole subtitle: A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon Line to Understand the Soul of the Nation by Ammonique Perry. This book was recommended to me by Patrice. She did a video recommending some titles for Black history reading, and this was one of them. I was able to access it through the Libby app, and I listened to it as an audiobook. I think I just started it 3 days ago. It is so It is so good. It is so beautifully written, and Ammonique Perry is the narrator, the person who does or reads the audiobook or reads the book in the audio, which makes it that much better. And one of the things I found that was so kind of engaging for me about the book was not just that it's a work of history, but it's a work of history that blends history with American culture today and the development of American culture. And it ties a lot of things together, and it makes a lot of kind of really powerful thematic arguments about the South and the South's role in U.S. culture in the United States of America, and what the United States looks like, stands for, is, how it's seen, and how the South oftentimes becomes the repository for all the bad things we think about in the United States, particularly racism, even though racism exists all across the United States in all kinds of states, and how central then to that story are Black people, are African Americans, and their story in the United States, and the way in which the culture of enslaved people, Black people, throughout American history, region by region, state by state, sometimes city by city, have influenced culture, whether it's culture in terms of the way we look at race and discuss race relations, to whether it's culture in terms of music, whether that's the blues or rock and roll or rap music or hip hop music, whether it's food and the way in which food plays a role in African American culture and therefore in American culture, whether it's the way in which writers have written about the South, Black writers and white writers written about the South. And essentially what Perry does is she recounts in some ways her trips through almost every state which would be a part of the South. I don't believe she went to Arkansas. Is one of the states I know. I don't believe there's anything specifically about Arkansas in there. There's very little about Texas as well. And kind of talking about the differences state to state, region to region, and how all those things are influenced by this kind of history of white people and Black people living side by side, not side by side harmoniously, and how that's influenced and created a lot of things that we take for granted about life in the United States. Language, by the way, another thing that she talks about. And one of the points she's making, not all of them, because I'm pretty sure I missed some of them. One of the points that she makes, I think, really eloquently, without hammering that point home, is that the truth of the matter is that poor and working class and middle class people should see themselves as groups of people, regardless of race, regardless of those racial divides. Those racial divisions are reinforced to prevent, in some ways, the unification of people along class and social lines, which probably makes a lot more sense than dividing ourselves by race. But she talks about, all the issues you can think about, I think, in relatively recent American history. It's a book that's published in 2022. And it kind of incorporates them all and connects them all. And it really is a brilliant work of history, cultural history, of Black history, and it's just really great. And I would encourage you to read it, and I thank Patrice for mentioning that and listing that as one of her books. It's also possible that Hannah from Hannah's Books also recommended this book to me several years ago. And I want to mention that because one of the books I do want to get to this year is a book written by Hannah's father. Hannah's father, Charles Joyner, was a historian who lived, taught, worked in South Carolina, and he wrote a book called Down by the Riverside, a South Carolina Slave Community, which is really, in some ways, I think, one of the foundational studies of a specific slave community, treating it as a specific singular culture, and incorporating all kinds of sources from folklore to interviews done with former slaves by the WPA and all kinds of sources. And I just have finished reading the introductions to that, where there's actually some charming information about how he wrote it so that his daughter Hannah would be able to grasp the ideas he was talking about. She was 16 at the time. And so I'm really looking forward to getting that. That's a book I hope to be able to finish reading this month as well. And then also I want to read Juneteenth. That is Ralph Ellison's second novel, published long after Invisible Man. And I was encouraged to read this by Jack, The Rambling Raconteur, and so I'm hoping to get that this month as well. In addition to that, I did read another novel by Percival Everett, that was Dr. No, which really was a lot of fun. I don't think that I would put Dr. No above the other three Percival Everett novels I've read, Erasure, Telephone, and The Trees. I don't think I would put it on that level. But it was a lot of fun. Essentially is a spoof on James Bond type movies or type stories in which you have a supervillain and then somebody who's working against them and there's a femme fatale, and this all centers around the idea of nothing. Even though the book's called Dr. No, it's called that because the main character is a PhD whose primary study is nothing. And even though it's called Dr. No, it really more closely mirrors the plot of Goldfinger in terms of what they're trying to do in Fort Knox. But the idea here is that nothing is this all-consuming force. And harnessing the power of nothing is what the supervillain wants. And it was just a lot of fun kind of decoding the names of characters in the book. A lot of fun in terms of, if you watch James Bond movies, have read those books perhaps, I've only watched the movies, then it's a lot of fun in that regard too. And it was a really great break from my BookTube prize reading, which started off badly. I won't tell you what group I'm in, and I certainly won't tell you what book I read, but the first book I read was not one that I enjoyed. And it would be hard for me to think of a book that is in this group that I could read that I would enjoy or rate lower than the first book I read. And that includes the second book that I read, which was much better in terms of being pacey and really plot heavy. There's some issues I have with that book as well, so I don't know how it will rank, but it was a far more enjoyable reading experience than the first book. And so because of this, I was kind of glad to have Dr. No thrown in there as a book that I had read. Anyway, there you go. There's a little reading update with discussion about my Black History Month reading, some other books I've read, and little hints, teasers maybe about my BookTube prize reading and how that's going. As always, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.